The kitchen smelled like apple pie. 10 minutes later, that scent would mix with smoke and the smell of murder. He thought he was eliminating a threat. He strangled an elderly woman not out of hatred, but out of fear. Then he found the letter and realized if he had simply called his daughter, no one would have died. But fear always moves faster than remorse. Samuel drew the last letter in the guest register and paused. The ink had dried on the pen's tip, leaving a tiny blot next to the final stroke. Larson. Not Lawrence. A single letter, the border between the past and the attempt to forget it. Anna stood across the counter, her hands folded over a faded floral apron. She was silent, but her gaze lingered on the signature a moment longer than necessary. Samuel capped the pen and set it down beside the book. "My ID's in a friend's car," he said evenly. "He drove upstate. Be back in a couple of days." She nodded, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening as she squinted. "I see." Samuel pulled a wad of cash from his pocket, counted out the crisp $100 bills, and laid them on the counter. He paid for 2 weeks in advance, though he wasn't sure he'd even stay for one. "No need to worry about any paperwork," he added. "Just passing through." Anna took the money, counting it slowly as if she were verifying something other than the amount. Then she folded the bills in half and tucked them into her apron pocket. "Your room is on the second floor, end of the hall," she said. "It'll be more convenient." Convenient for what, she didn't specify. Samuel picked up his suitcase and moved deeper into the house. The staircase was just opposite the front door, narrow, wooden, with a worn banister. He paused at the bottom step, glancing down the hall toward the kitchen. He climbed the stairs, counting each step. The third one let out a dull groan under his weight. The fifth was sharper, almost a crack. He memorized this as he continued his ascent, a map already forming in his mind. The front door, the stairs, the kitchen, the windows. Escape routes. His room was small but clean. A bed against the wall, a nightstand, and an old wardrobe with a mirrored door. The window overlooked the front yard, with the neighboring house visible just beyond it. Too close. He checked the latch on the window. It was old, but sturdy. Then he turned to the door and turned the key in the lock twice, testing the mechanism. It worked smoothly. Samuel set his suitcase by the wall without fully unpacking, taking out only a razor, a toothbrush, and a spare shirt. The rest remained packed, just in case he had to leave in a hurry. He sat on the edge of the bed and ran a hand over his face, the stubble scratching his palm. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. He clenched his fist, then unclenched it. The callus on his palm, a remnant of months of tension, throbbed faintly. He rubbed it with his thumb and exhaled. This was temporary. The boarding house wasn't a sanctuary, just a pause. That evening, the television was on in the living room. Mr. Peterson, another boarder, sat in a worn armchair with his legs crossed. He had a gray beard, soft slippers, and a fine checked sweater. He was reading a newspaper, but the screen glowed in the background, broadcasting the evening news. Samuel walked into the room and stopped at the doorway. A newscaster in a sharp suit appeared on the screen. The investigation into the death of a 39-year-old woman in the Cedar Creek area has been reopened. The DA's office has requested additional materials. A photograph appeared. Samuel saw her face. Dark, shoulder-length hair, soft features, a tired smile. It was an old picture taken about 5 years ago when she still wore her hair down. His wife. He took a step forward, his hands balling into fists automatically. "The signal's fuzzy," he said, walking toward the television. Mr. Peterson looked up from his newspaper. "Seems fine to me." Samuel hit the power button. The screen went dark. Silence returned to the room. Mr. Peterson stared at the blank screen for a few seconds, then at Samuel. His eyebrows rose, but he said nothing. He folded his newspaper, stood up, and left the living room. Samuel was left alone. His hands were trembling, a slight, almost imperceptible vibration. He unclenched his fists, rubbed his knuckles, and sat down on the sofa. The past had caught up with him. Not through a police call, not through a phone call, but through a television in a provincial boarding house. Morning began with the smell of coffee and fresh pastries. Samuel descended to the first floor, trying to step on the edges of the stairs where the creaking was quieter. Samuel sat down opposite him. Anna placed a cup of coffee and a small plate with a slice of apple pie in front of him. "It's strange," she said calmly, pouring herself some coffee. "You look a lot like a man from the news." Samuel picked up the cup but didn't bring it to his lips. He looked at the landlady. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes were brown, attentive, without a hint of challenge. "Everyone on TV looks like someone," he replied neutrally. She nodded and sat down. Mr. Peterson pretended to read his newspaper, but Samuel could feel his attention. "Perhaps," Anna agreed. The pause stretched on. Samuel took a sip of his coffee. Hot, strong, with a slight bitterness. He swallowed and set the cup back on its saucer. Anna continued to watch him, not staring, not aggressively, just watching. Samuel realized it was a test, not an accusation, a test of his reaction. She was observing. Later, after Mr. Peterson went outside for a smoke, Anna cleared the dishes. Samuel remained at the table, trying to appear relaxed. "You're from the Cedar Creek area, aren't you?" she asked without turning around. He froze, his fingers tightening around the coffee cup. "I was there for work once," he said cautiously. She nodded, placing the plates in the sink. "Do you have a daughter?" Samuel's gaze lingered on her back for a second. "2. "I do." Anna turned, drying her hands on a towel. "Children take these losses the hardest," she said softly. Samuel stood up. "I need to step out." He walked past her, feeling her eyes follow him to the door. This was no longer a coincidence. She was putting the pieces together. In the afternoon, Anna was cleaning the living room. Samuel returned from his walk and saw a newspaper on the kitchen table. The local edition, folded to a page with a small article. He moved closer. The headline read, "Investigators request new forensic analysis in Cedar Creek case." A photograph was next to the text. His face. An old driver's license photo, taken 7 years ago. Anna entered the kitchen with a rag in her hand. "Newspapers make mistakes sometimes," she said without looking at him. "They'll print anything." She didn't move the paper. She just left it on the table and walked out. Samuel picked up the newspaper. The paper rustled under his fingers. He read the short article to the end. The last name wasn't mentioned in full, only the first few letters. But the photograph was a match. Mr. Peterson walked past the kitchen, paused, and looked at the newspaper in Samuel's hands. His eyebrows shot up. He didn't say anything, but his gaze lingered. Samuel folded the paper and put it back. The mask was cracking. Night. Samuel lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, except for the ticking of a clock on the wall and the occasional creak of floorboards somewhere below. He got up, pulled on his jeans, and stepped out of his room. The hallway was dark. Anna's door was to the left, closer to the stairs. Mr. Peterson's was on the right. He crept downstairs, stepping carefully. The 3rd step. The 5th. He avoided them, shifting his weight to the edges. The living room was empty. On a small table by the window lay Anna's phone, an old flip phone with a small screen. Samuel picked it up. He pressed the center button. The screen lit up, asking for a password. He tried a few combinations. Nothing. The phone was locked. He put it back, trying not to change its position. He ran a hand over the table, checking if he'd moved anything. His eyes fell on the clock. 2:17 a.m. Every movement here could be heard. He went back upstairs. Anna's door was closed. He moved closer, listening. Silence. Or maybe not. A slight rustle from within. Maybe she was awake. He gently tried the handle. Locked. Samuel took a step back. The fifth stair creaked under his weight. He froze. Silence from inside the room. He turned and walked back toward his own door. As he passed the top of the stairs, Mr. Peterson emerged from his room, a mug in his hand, wearing pajama bottoms and an old t-shirt. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. Samuel stopped. "Looking for the bathroom." Mr. Peterson nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the opposite end of the hall where the bathroom was located. "It's over there," he said, pointing. "Right. Thanks." Mr. Peterson walked past him, heading to the kitchen for water. He added nothing more, but the doubt in his eyes was obvious. Samuel entered his room and closed the door. Another observer. The next morning, Samuel went down to the living room. Mr. Peterson was in his armchair with a newspaper. Anna was busy in the kitchen. Samuel walked over to the shared computer on a desk by the window. He opened the browser and checked the history. The searches were there. Cedar Creek accident. Investigation reopened 2025. Samuel Larson. He deleted the entries one by one, cleared the cache, the trash, the cookies. The living room door opened. Mr. Peterson walked in. Samuel quickly closed the browser window and stood up. "Just checking my email," he said. Mr. Peterson nodded and walked to his armchair. Samuel left the room, feeling panic begin to replace caution. In the afternoon, Samuel went upstairs on the pretext of checking the window in his room. He walked past Anna's room and paused. The door was ajar. He pushed it open. Inside, the room was tidy. The bed was made, and a stack of papers sat on the desk. He stepped inside and went to the desk. He began sifting through the papers, receipts, bills, old letters. "Do you need something?" Anna's voice. Samuel spun around. She was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed in front of her. "I was checking the window," he started. "The window is in your room." He took a step toward her. She didn't move. Anna's voice. Samuel spun around. She stood in the doorway, her arms folded. "I was checking the window," he began. "The window is in your room." He took a step toward her. She didn't flinch. He grabbed her by the wrist, not hard, but firmly. Anna looked down at his hand, then back into his eyes. "If you're innocent," she said, her voice loud and clear, "you have nothing to fear." The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Steps echoed in the hallway. Mr. Peterson paused at the door. Samuel let go of her wrist. Anna didn't step back. She continued to watch him, her gaze unwavering. Samuel left the room, feeling the situation spiral out of his control. That evening, as he sat in his room, he heard Anna's voice from downstairs. She was on the phone. He opened his door and listened. "Yes, he's here, I'm sure of it." A pause. "No, not yet." Samuel's fist tightened. Who was on the other end? The police? His wife's family? He went downstairs. Anna was by the living room window, phone to her ear. When she saw him, she ended the call. "Who are you talking to?" he asked. She slipped the phone into her apron pocket. "That's none of your business." He took a step forward. "Did you call the police?" Anna shook her head. "I've already spoken to someone." "Who?" She didn't answer, just looked at him, calmly, without fear. Mr. Peterson appeared in the kitchen doorway, listening, but not intervening. Samuel realized he had no idea who else knew. The police, journalists, his wife's relatives. His time was running out. The first-floor hallway smelled of lemon polish and something sweet, likely baking in the kitchen. Samuel walked from the stairs toward the living room, intending to get a glass of water, his footsteps muffled by the runner. A voice drifted from the living room. He stopped. The door was ajar, a crack the width of his hand. Anna stood by the window, her back to him, the phone at her ear. "Yes, he's here. I'm sure of it." A pause. He didn't enter, instead pressing himself against the wall, out of sight. The kitchen fan whirred to life, its sharp hum drowning out her next words. He caught only fragments. "Won't tell," and "daughter." Then silence, though the fan continued to run. Anna ended the call and placed the phone on a small table. Samuel stepped out from the shadows and entered the living room, holding an empty glass as if he had just been looking for water. Anna turned, her expression calm, her breathing even. There was no trace of agitation. "Do you need something?" she asked. "Water," Samuel said. "In the kitchen," she nodded. He walked past her. The phone, an old black model, lay on the table next to a napkin, its screen dark. He walked to the kitchen more slowly than necessary, listening for any sign of nervousness in her movements. Footsteps, the shifting of furniture, the sound of a drawer opening. Nothing. She remained standing by the window. Her lack of anxiety felt less like innocence and more like preparation. He let the tap run but didn't drink, setting the glass on the edge of the sink before returning to the living room. Anna was now sitting in an armchair with a book in her lap, reading glasses perched on her nose. Her face showed complete indifference to his presence. He walked past her and went up the stairs, the third step groaning under his weight. He didn't look back. At the top, he paused by his door and glanced at Anna's. It was closed, but a thin sliver of light escaped from underneath. "Yes, he's here. I'm sure of it." Who was on the other end? A cop? A relative? A reporter? He went into his room and locked the door. The day dragged on. Samuel left the house in the morning, wandered the streets, and returned after lunch. Mr. Peterson was in the garden reading a newspaper while Anna cleaned the first floor. Samuel went upstairs. The hallway was empty. Anna's door was slightly ajar. He paused, listening. The clatter of dishes came from downstairs. She was in the kitchen. He pushed the door open. The room was neat, the bed made. On the desk by the window was a notebook, a stack of receipts, and a small lamp. And an envelope, white, thick. On it, in neat handwriting, was written, "Cedar Creek County Sheriff's Department." Samuel moved closer. The envelope lay on top of the notebook, not hidden. The flap wasn't sealed. Its edge was slightly lifted. The handwriting matched the entries in the notebook, old-fashioned, calligraphic. Cedar Creek, the place where his wife had died. He ran a finger along the edge of the envelope without picking it up. The paper was new, uncreased. It had clearly been prepared recently. Footsteps sounded below. He left the room, closing the door just as he had found it. Night. Samuel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The clock read 1:43 a.m. The house was silent. He got up, pulled on his jeans, and stepped into the hall, barefoot to minimize the noise. Anna's door was closed. No light from underneath. He crept closer, listening. A slow, deep breathing. She was asleep. He pressed down on the handle. The door opened without a sound. It was dark inside. He waited for his eyes to adjust. The silhouette of the bed, the outline of the wardrobe, the desk by the window. The envelope was still there. He approached, took it, and pulled out the single sheet of paper. It was blank, absolutely empty. He turned it over. Nothing. He held it up to the window, checking it against the faint glow of the street lamp outside. No pencil marks, no indentations, just emptiness. He returned the sheet to the envelope, careful not to change its angle, and placed it back where he had found it. He exhaled. The blank page didn't reassure him. On the contrary. Why prepare an envelope addressed to the police, but leave it empty? A test? A trap? Anna might have left it there deliberately to see if he would open it. The real letter could be hidden somewhere else. He left the room, closed the door, and went back to his own. He sat on the edge of the bed, clenching and unclenching his fist. The callus on his palm throbbed. The blankness of the paper made the threat formless. He couldn't gauge the scale of the danger, and the uncertainty was more exhausting than any concrete accusation. The next morning, Samuel went downstairs. Mr. Peterson was out in the garden with a mug of coffee. Anna was in the kitchen. He could hear the clinking of dishes. He walked into the living room and sat at the computer. He opened the browser and checked Anna's email. The password was saved, no login required. The Sent folder was empty. No emails to the police, no messages to relatives. But the search history had a recent entry. Cedar Creek investigation reopened 2025. The search date, yesterday, 2:22 p.m. He deleted the line, cleared the cache, the trash, the temporary files. He closed the browser. His hands were shaking. He was acting like a man hiding a crime. The realization hit him harder than the actions themselves. That evening, Samuel sat in his room and heard the sound of a suitcase opening. His own. He ran a hand over the lid of the suitcase, standing against the wall. It was time to leave. He began packing. Shirts, jeans, a toothbrush. Neatly, without rushing. The actions were mechanical. Familiar. Footsteps sounded outside. A light knock on the door. "Everything all right?" Mr. Peterson's voice. Samuel opened the door. Mr. Peterson stood in the hallway, mug in hand. His gaze flickered to the open suitcase. "Just packing," Samuel said. "Early meeting tomorrow." Mr. Peterson nodded slowly. "A little late for packing." "Yeah." A pause. Mr. Peterson walked past him toward the stairs. He said nothing more, but Samuel saw the doubt in his eyes. 10 minutes later, he heard voices downstairs, Mr. Peterson and Anna. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was quiet, confidential. He closed the suitcase, fastened the latches, and set it by the door. The plan was simple. Leave at 3 a.m. when the house was asleep. Out the main entrance. No noise, no explanations. Running wasn't an admission of guilt. It was a temporary measure. That's what he told himself. The clock showed 2:47 a.m. Samuel picked up his suitcase and opened the door. The hallway was dark. He stepped out, closed the door behind him, and headed for the stairs. The third step creaked loudly. He froze. A light switched on downstairs. Anna was standing by the front door in her housecoat, her arms folded. Her gaze was calm, attentive. She looked at the suitcase. "Running away," she said quietly, "is an admission." He descended the stairs and set the suitcase on the floor. "I'm changing my place of residence. That's my right." "Of course," Anna agreed, taking a step closer and blocking his path to the door. "But why at night?" "It's more convenient." "For whom?" He tightened his grip on the suitcase handle. "Let me pass." She didn't move. She stood between him and the door, a small, thin woman barring his way with her mere presence. "Anna," Samuel said, stepping forward. "Move aside." She shook her head. "You're afraid. I can see it." He tried to go around her. She shifted to her left, blocking his path again. He shoved her shoulder. Not hard, but hard enough. Anna lost her balance and fell, her palm hitting the wooden floor with a dull, distinct thud. Samuel froze. Upstairs, a door creaked open. Mr. Peterson peered into the hallway. Anna slowly got to her feet. She didn't cry out, didn't groan. She stood straight, dusted off her housecoat, and looked at Samuel. "You pushed me, Samuel Larson," she said his full name, deliberately. Samuel felt the blood drain from his face. "You don't understand. I understand more than you think," she said. "Fear won't fix anything." Mr. Peterson started down the stairs. "Anna, do you need help?" "Everything is fine, Mr. Peterson," she replied, her eyes still locked on Samuel. He took a step back. Anna wasn't afraid. Her composure was absolute, not feigned, not for show. It was real. Her lack of fear unnerved him more than any scream or threat could. "Why aren't you afraid?" he breathed. Anna tilted her head slightly. "Because I've already survived the worst." A pause. "You're not the first man who thinks violence can solve his problems." Samuel's fist clenched and unclenched, the callus on his palm throbbing. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to stop running from yourself." He lunged for the door. Anna didn't move. "Do you realize you're stopping me from leaving?" "Yes." "Do you realize how this could end?" She nodded. "I wrote a letter," she said slowly. "If anything happens to me, it will be opened." Samuel froze. "Where is it?" "Not in this house anymore." He felt the space around him shrinking. Fleeing no longer eliminated the threat. Even if he left, the letter would remain. "Who did you give it to?" Anna didn't answer. Samuel's mind raced through the possibilities. The mail, a lawyer, a relative, the police with instructions to open it upon her disappearance. Any act of violence would trigger the mechanism of his exposure. Mr. Peterson descended another step, his face etched with alarm. "Maybe we should discuss this in the morning," he suggested cautiously. Anna shook her head. "Samuel Larson is leaving tonight. He doesn't need to wait for morning." Samuel looked from his suitcase to the door, then to Anna. The threat had become systemic. Running was useless. Violence would activate the proof. Silence would, too. He picked up his suitcase and turned back toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" Anna asked. "To my room." He went upstairs, past Mr. Peterson, down the hall and into his room, locking the door behind him. He set the suitcase against the wall and sat on the edge of the bed, dropping his head into his hands. The letter. She had written a letter. Where was it? Who would get it? What did it say? He had no answers, but he understood one thing. The threat was no longer tied to her life or death. She had already set the process in motion. He lifted his head and looked out the window. The street was empty, a lone streetlight casting a cold glow on the asphalt. The past wouldn't let go. The present was constricting. The future was vanishing. He clenched and unclenched his fist, rubbing his knuckles with his thumb. Anna had won this round. Not with force, but with composure. She saw his fear. She called him by his name. She wasn't afraid of the consequences, and that made her more dangerous than any accuser. He lay down on the bed, still fully dressed, and closed his eyes. Sleep wouldn't come. It was only silence, the ticking of the clock, and Anna's voice replaying in his mind. I wrote a letter. If anything happens to me, it will be opened. Dawn seeped through the curtains in a weak strip of light. Samuel lay on the bed in the same clothes he'd worn hours ago, his eyes open, fixed on the ceiling. A crack in the plaster snaked across it like a river, branching and twisting. I wrote a letter. If anything happens to me, it will be opened. The phrase repeated over and over, a stuck record in his head. He turned onto his side. The clock on the nightstand read 5:23 a.m. He hadn't slept a minute. The letter, where was it? Who had it? What did it say? He sat up, running a hand over his face. The stubble was thicker now. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. His fingers found the faint, familiar scar on his cheekbone. A cold logic began to form. The letter was the only leverage, the only threat. If it disappeared, Anna would lose her power. He stood and walked to the window. The street was empty. The street light was still on, though the sky was already lightening. Eliminating the letter meant what? Breaking into her room, searching, destroying the document. Nothing more. He didn't let himself think beyond that. By 6, he heard footsteps downstairs. Anna was awake. Samuel opened his door and stepped into the hall. The scent of cinnamon drifted up from below. She was cooking, as usual, as if nothing had happened. He went down the stairs, stepping over the 3rd tread and landing carefully. The 5th still creaked. The 1st-floor hallway was empty. The back door was shut. The front door was locked from the inside. He could see the deadbolt was thrown. He walked to the kitchen and paused in the doorway. Anna stood at the stove with her back to him, slicing apples on a wooden board into neat, even segments. Dough was already rolled out on the counter. The oven was preheating, its hum low and monotonous. She didn't turn when he entered. "I know what you did," she said calmly. He froze. A wave of something that was not quite anger and not quite panic, but a sickening mix of shame and rage rose inside him. "You're mistaken," he replied, his voice steadier than he expected. Anna turned. She looked at him, the apple knife still in her hand. Her expression wasn't accusatory. It was weary. "No," she said. "I'm not mistaken." A pause. Samuel took a step forward. His hands balled into fists, but he kept them at his sides. "You don't understand," he began. "I understand more than you think." She set the knife on the counter and wiped her hands on a towel, slowly, deliberately. He felt the kitchen closing in on him. The back door was behind him. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. Anna stood between him and the stairs. "You have no right," he said, his voice dropping. "A right to what? The truth?" He stepped closer. Her calm was more piercing than a scream. "You can't prove anything." Anna tilted her head slightly. "I don't have to prove anything. You've already proven it to yourself." The table was between them, a container of flour, a rolling pin, a bowl of apples sitting on it. An ordinary kitchen scene. But he felt reality begin to fray. This was the moment, the point of no return. He lunged toward the table. Anna didn't back away. He saw the knife on the cutting board. He didn't take it. Instead, he grabbed her by the apron, by the throat, both at once. She tried to pry his hands away, her fingers clawing at his wrists, but she didn't have the strength. She didn't scream. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Perhaps she was afraid of waking Mr. Peterson. He slammed her against the counter. The flour canister toppled, white powder dusting the linoleum. The oven continued its low hum. He squeezed harder than he'd intended. She stopped struggling sooner than he'd expected. His hands trembled, muscles strained to their limit. The callus on his palm burned with pain. After a few seconds, her body went limp. He let go. She slid slowly to the floor, landing in a heap amid the spilled flour, a white cloud rising to settle on her housecoat. He took a step back. The kitchen was silent, save for the ticking of the wall clock and the drone of the oven. He dropped to his knees, checked for a pulse at her neck, pressed his fingers to her wrist. Nothing. She wasn't breathing. He stood up and wiped his hands on the edge of her apron, an automatic, unthinking gesture. Relief was the first thing he felt. A brief, almost physical release. The threat was gone. Then he smelled it. The pie in the oven was starting to burn. He spun sharply toward the stairs, the third step, the fifth. He didn't bother avoiding them now, his steps echoing as he took them two at a time. The second-floor hallway was empty. The door to Anna's room was ajar. He went in. The desk by the window. The envelope still in the same spot. He strode over and snatched it, not bothering with care. He tore it open, the sound of ripping paper sharp and loud in the silent room. He pulled out the sheet of paper and stopped. It wasn't a report to the police. It was a letter, addressed to his daughter. The handwriting was Anna's, neat, old-fashioned, calligraphic. Your father is here. He is very afraid. If he calls you, please listen to him. Samuel read the line again, then once more. She wasn't going to turn him in. She wanted to make him talk to his daughter. The letter wasn't a threat. It was an attempt to help. He sank onto the edge of Anna's bed, the paper trembling in his hands. He hadn't killed her to escape exposure. He had killed her because he was afraid of a conversation. At the bottom of the page was a postscript, written in a smaller hand. If he resorts to violence again, it means I wasn't mistaken. The words cut deeper than a knife. She had predicted this. She had given him one last chance, and he had just confirmed her judgment. He crumpled the sheet in his fist, then smoothed it out again, rereading the words. It was a moral indictment, not a legal one. A moral one. And it was absolute. The smell of burning grew stronger. Samuel lifted his head. Smoke was drifting up from downstairs, a thin wisp visible in the window's light. The pie was burning. He stood up, walked into the hallway, and paused at the top of the stairs. Below lay Anna's body. Smoke. The smell of burnt pastry mixed with cinnamon. Mr. Peterson's door opened. He stepped into the hall in his pajama pants and a t-shirt, sniffing the air. Is something burning? He asked, looking at Samuel. Samuel didn't answer right away. A second passed. 2. The pie, he said. Anna must have left it in the oven. Mr. Peterson frowned. That's strange. She never forgets. He walked past Samuel toward the stairs and began to descend. Samuel remained frozen. Mr. Peterson reached the first floor and walked down the hall to the kitchen. A pause. Then a scream. Anna! Samuel slowly made his way downstairs. Mr. Peterson was standing in the kitchen doorway, one hand braced against the frame, his face pale. What happened? His voice trembled. Samuel came closer and looked over Mr. Peterson's shoulder. Anna's body was on the floor, surrounded by spilled flour. The oven was still on, smoke pouring from its seams. Mr. Peterson turned to him. Call 911. Samuel didn't move. It's too late, he said quietly. Mr. Peterson stepped into the kitchen and knelt beside the body. He checked for a pulse, then looked up. She's dead. Samuel nodded. Mr. Peterson stood, his gaze fixed on Samuel, long and searching. Were you here? I came down and found her, Samuel answered evenly. When? A few minutes ago. Mr. Peterson crossed to the stove and turned off the oven. He opened the door, and a thick cloud of smoke billowed out. He stepped back, coughing. The window, he choked out. Open the window. Samuel went to the window over the sink and pushed it open. Cold air rushed in, dispersing the smoke. Mr. Peterson stood over Anna's body, his hands clenched into fists. "Her heart?" he asked. "Maybe," Samuel said. "She seemed healthy." "People aren't always what they seem." Mr. Peterson looked at him again, his gaze sharpening. "You two were arguing last night." "Yes?" "About what?" "Me leaving." A beat of silence. "And you decided to stay?" "Yes." Mr. Peterson walked around the table, his eyes taking in the spilled flour, the knife, the apples. "We need to call the police," he said slowly. Samuel nodded. "Of course." Mr. Peterson left the kitchen. Samuel could hear his footsteps in the living room as he looked for the phone. He remained by the window, staring out at the street. The dawn was brighter now. Lights were on in the house next door. Smoke drifted out of the open window in a thin, almost invisible stream. But someone might see it. Mr. Peterson returned. "The phone's not in the living room. Do you have yours?" Samuel pulled his cell from his pocket and handed it over. Mr. Peterson dialed, his voice short and clipped as he gave the address, the circumstances. A death. Unknown causes. He hung up and returned the phone. "They'll be here in 10 minutes. Samuel pocketed the phone. They stood in silence, Anna's body between them. "A strange way to die," Mr. Peterson said. "She was baking a pie and just collapsed?" "A heart attack can happen suddenly." "There are red marks on her neck." Samuel didn't respond. Mr. Peterson knelt beside the body again, examining her neck more closely. "They look like fingerprints." Samuel's fist tightened in his pocket, the callus on his palm flaring with pain. "Maybe she was trying to loosen her collar," he said, "when she couldn't breathe." Mr. Peterson stood up and looked Samuel in the eyes. "Were you here when she died?" "No." "Are you sure?" "I came down and found her on the floor." A pause. "You pushed her last night," Mr. Peterson said quietly. "I saw it." Samuel held his gaze. "It was an accident." "Which one? The push last night, or the death this morning?" Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Mr. Peterson stepped back toward the doorway. "The police will figure it out," he said. Samuel remained by the window as the sirens grew louder. Blue lights flashed across the glass, pulsing rhythmically. A car pulled up in front of the house. Doors slammed. Voices. Mr. Peterson went to the front door and opened it. Samuel heard fragments of the conversation. "First floor, kitchen. She's dead." Footsteps in the hall. 2 men in uniform. One was tall and fit, around 40, his face calm, almost impassive. The other was younger, holding a tablet. The senior officer entered the kitchen. He glanced at the body, then knelt beside it. "Who found her?" he asked, without turning around. "I did," Samuel answered. The officer stood and looked at him. "Your name?" "Samuel Larson." "When did you discover the body?" "Around 6 this morning. I smelled something burning and came downstairs." "You live here?" "Temporarily, renting a room." The officer nodded. He walked to the table, examining the knife, the apples, the flour on the floor. "Who else is in the house?" Mr. Peterson stepped forward. "Me, Nicholas Peterson, also a boarder." "Did you hear anything suspicious?" "No, I woke up from the smell of smoke." The officer turned back to Samuel. "And you?" "The same." "So you were both asleep until 6? Mr. Peterson nodded. Samuel hesitated for a second. "Yes." The officer knelt by the body again, inspecting Anna's neck. "Signs of mechanical asphyxiation," he said to his younger partner. "Call the crime scene unit." Samuel felt the walls closing in. The officer stood up and looked at him. "Samuel Larson, we need you to come down to the station to give a statement." "I've already told you everything." "It's a formality." A pause. "You can refuse," the officer added evenly. "But I wouldn't recommend it." Samuel nodded. "I'll go." The officer gestured toward the door. Samuel walked out of the kitchen. 2 more people, paramedics with a stretcher, were waiting in the hall. Mr. Peterson watched him go, his expression unchanged, but his eyes said everything. Samuel stepped outside. The morning air was cold and sharp. He took a deep breath. The smell of burning lingered in his nostrils. It wasn't from the pie. It was from him. The smoke filled the kitchen, thick, black, and acrid. Samuel stood in the middle of the room, staring at the oven. The pie crust inside had cracked, black ash flaking onto the baking sheet. The smell of burnt dough mingled with cinnamon, sweet and bitter. He went to the stove and turned off the gas. The flame died with a soft click. But the smoke continued to spread, down the hall, into the living room and up the stairs, thin gray tendrils creeping along the ceiling. Mr. Peterson coughed upstairs. His door creaked open wider. Outside, a gate slammed. The neighbor's yard. Someone had come out, drawn by the smell. Samuel looked at the window. The sash was open, the cold air pulling the smoke out, but too slowly. The smell would not go unnoticed. Time was no longer an abstract concept. It was the ticking of the wall clock above the table. The distant wail of a siren, fire or police, it didn't matter. He turned to Anna's body. She lay on the floor amid the flour, her housecoat dusted with white powder, her neck at an unnatural angle. He looked away. Time was no longer an abstract concept. It was the ticking of the wall clock above the table, the distant wail of a siren, fire or police, it didn't matter. Samuel turned to Anna's body. She lay on the floor amid the flour, her housecoat dusted with white powder, her neck at an unnatural angle. He looked away. On the windowsill sat a box of matches, red, worn, nearly empty. He picked it up, 3 matches inside. Arson. The fire would destroy the evidence. The body would burn. The marks on her neck would disappear. The kitchen would turn to ash, and with it, the proof. But fire was fast, uncontrollable. The house was old, wooden. The flames would spread to the neighboring buildings. People would get hurt. Another crime. Another step into the lie. He closed the box and put it back on the windowsill. Flight. The back door led to the garden. The fence was low, no more than 4 feet. He could be over it in seconds. The neighbor's yard would be empty at this hour. Beyond it, an alley, a street, a bus stop. He could disappear, dissolve into the city, move to another state, change his name again. But the body would remain. Mr. Peterson had seen him last night. The push, the argument, the tension. The police would start looking. Cameras on the streets, witnesses at bus stops. There was always a trail. And the letter to his daughter, Anna's words, proof of his guilt, not legal, but moral. Samuel walked to the table, looking at the spilled flour, the knife, the apples. A staged scene. Overturn the chairs, smash the drawers, create the illusion of a struggle, a robbery, steal the money from her room, break a window from the inside, lie upon lie. Every option required a sequel. Every step deepened the chain of violence. He sat down at the table, white flour clinging to his sleeves. He dragged a hand across the tabletop, leaving a clean streak in the powdered wood. For the first time, he had no plan. The silence became heavy, oppressive. He could hear his own breathing, the ticking of the clock, the rustle of flour under his feet. There was always a plan, control, calculation. But now, There was only a void. He stood up and climbed the stairs, the fifth step groaning louder than before. Anna's room greeted him with silence. The desk, the bed, the wardrobe, everything neat, impeccable. The torn envelope lay on the bed where he'd left it. He picked up the letter and unfolded the sheet. Your father is here. He is very afraid. If he calls you, please listen to him. He turned the paper over. On the back was a short phrase written in a small but clear hand. He's not a monster. He's a coward. Samuel froze. He read it again. He's a coward. Not a murderer. Not a monster. A coward. The words struck him with the force of a blade. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in his hands. A coward. She had seen it. Seen through the justifications, the anger, the protective shell he had built for years. He remembered the kitchen in their old apartment, his wife on the floor, the sharp edge of the counter, blood on the linoleum. His first thought hadn't been to help or to call for an ambulance. His first thought had been, did anyone hear? He had checked the windows, listened for the neighbors, assessed the situation. Cold calculation, not rage. Fear. The fear of being discovered. The fear of losing control of the narrative. He crumpled the letter in his fist, then smoothed it out again. Anna hadn't been planning to turn him in. She wanted to force him to talk to his daughter, to restore some piece of his humanity. And he had killed her for it. Out of fear. Not out of anger. Not in self-defense. Out of cowardice. The circumstances hadn't forced him. His wife hadn't provoked him. Anna hadn't threatened him. It was him. His choice. His pattern. Fear, violence, cover-up. A repeating mechanism. He placed the letter on the desk, stood up, and looked out the window. The street was waking up. Cars, people, an ordinary morning. A normal world. A world he no longer belonged to. He went downstairs, past the third and fifth steps. Mr. Peterson was standing in the hallway, his face pale, his hands clenched. We need to call the police, Samuel said. Mr. Peterson stared at him for a long moment. You? Yes. Mr. Peterson took a step toward the kitchen and stopped at the threshold. He saw the body and covered his mouth with his hand. Oh, God. Samuel walked past him and pulled his phone from his pocket. But he didn't dial 911. Instead, he opened his contacts and scrolled down. Daughter. The photo was old, from 2 years ago. She was smiling then, her hair down, her eyes bright. She probably wasn't smiling now. His fingers trembled as he pressed the call button. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Hello? Her voice was quiet, wary. He exhaled. It's Dad. A long, heavy pause. What's wrong? He closed his eyes. I need to tell you the truth. About what? About Mom. About what happened. Silence on the other end. He could hear her short, quick breaths. Dad. I did a bad thing, he said slowly. A very bad thing. And I'm not going to hide anymore. He didn't mention Anna. He didn't describe the kitchen or go into detail, but the confession was made. His daughter was silent. A second. 5, 10. The silence was heavier than a scream. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he added. I don't have the right. Then why are you calling? Because you deserve the truth. Another pause. Where are you? In a small town. They'll be coming for me soon. Coming for you? The police. Her breathing quickened. Dad, what did you do? He opened his eyes and looked at Mr. Peterson, who was frozen in the hallway. I made the same mistake again. The exact same one. And this time, there are no excuses. Silence. I'm scared, she said softly. Me too. He heard her swallow. Will you call again? I don't know if they'll let me. Try. Okay. A pause. Dad? Yeah? Thanks for telling me. Samuel gripped the phone. Goodbye. Bye. The line went dead. He stood there, phone in hand, staring at the blank screen. The conversation brought no relief, but the wall between them had cracked. Mr. Peterson moved closer. You need to call the police. Samuel nodded. He dialed 911. A ring. A click. 911, what's your emergency? There's been a murder at the house, Samuel said evenly. He gave the street and house number. Your name? Samuel Larson. Are you a witness? No. I'm the one who killed her. A pause on the other end. Stay where you are. Police are on their way. I'll be here. He hung up. Mr. Peterson stared at him, a mixture of fear and disbelief in his eyes. You confessed? Yes. Why? Samuel set the phone on the table. Because I'm tired of being a coward. Mr. Peterson backed away, pressing himself against the wall. A siren wailed outside, distant, but drawing nearer. Samuel walked into the kitchen and stood by the window, looking out at the street. Blue lights flashed against the windows of the neighboring houses. A patrol car pulled up to the curb. Doors slammed, footsteps on the walkway. Samuel raised his hands above his head. The officers entered the house. The same one from before, tall, fit, with an impassive face, and his younger partner with the tablet. The senior officer came into the kitchen. He looked at Samuel, at the body, at the spilled flour. Samuel Larson? He asked. Yes. Put your hands down. Samuel lowered them. The officer approached the body, knelt, checked for a pulse, and examined her neck. Strangulation. He stood up and looked at Samuel. You called to report a murder. Yes. You told the operator you killed a person. Yes. Say it again here. Samuel exhaled. I did it. I killed Anna Kowalski. The officer wrote it down in a small notebook. Why? I was afraid. Of what? The truth. The officer raised an eyebrow. Explain. Samuel looked at the body. She wrote a letter to my daughter. I thought she was writing to the police. I decided to eliminate the threat. I killed her. But the letter wasn't for the police. Where's the letter? Upstairs, in her room. The officer nodded to his partner, who left the kitchen. Do you admit your guilt? Yes. A pause. You said you'd done worse before. What did you mean? Samuel clenched and unclenched his fist. My wife, a year ago, in Cedar Creek. The officer made a note. That case was closed, ruled an accident. It wasn't an accident. Silence. Are you changing your statement? I want to tell the truth. The officer closed his notebook. Samuel Larson, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Samuel nodded. I understand. The officer took out a pair of handcuffs. Samuel held out his hands. The metal was cold. The click of the locks was loud. The younger partner returned, holding the letter in a plastic evidence bag. "Found it," he said. The senior officer took the bag and read the text through the clear plastic. "He's not a monster, he's a coward," he read aloud. Samuel said nothing. The officer looked at him. Was she right? Samuel met his gaze. Yes. The officer nodded and gestured toward the door. "Let's go." Samuel walked out of the kitchen and down the hall. Mr. Peterson was still pressed against the wall. The front door was open, the morning light sharp and cold. He stepped out onto the porch. The blue lights of the patrol car reflected in the kitchen windows. The smoke still hung in the air, a thin haze slowly dissipating. Neighbors had gathered by the gate. An elderly woman, a man in a tracksuit, a young woman with a dog. They stared in silence. He could smell the acrid, cloying sweetness of something burning. It wasn't the pie. It was the decay, the lie, burned to the ground. He understood. The smell wasn't coming from the house. It was coming from him. He had been carrying this stench with him the entire time. The char of the past, the ash of unspoken confessions, the smoke of violence hidden under a layer of excuses. Now it was burning out in the open, and for the first time in a long time, he made no attempt to extinguish the flame. An officer led him to the car and opened the back door. Samuel got in. The handcuffs clinked against the metal frame. The door slammed shut. The car pulled away, leaving the house behind. The flashing lights went off. He looked out the window as the streets of the small town slid by. Ordinary houses, ordinary people, an ordinary life. A life he would never return to. But for the first time in a year, he wasn't afraid of that. Because, for the first time, he had stopped running.